I am Kay, 34 years old, sitting at my parents' dining table in Boston when it happened. The apple pie had just been served when my mother casually said, "I wish you were never born." Everyone laughed like it was the funniest joke. Everyone except me. I put my fork down slowly, my heart racing beneath my calm exterior. I forced a smile while deciding whether to stay silent as usual or finally speak up. Then I said my one line. The room went dead silent. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how I finally stood up to my mother after 34 years. Growing up in our pristine colonial home in suburban Massachusetts, appearances were everything. My mother, Amanda, built her reputation as one of Boston's most formidable attorneys, known for her razor-sharp mind and uncompromising standards. My father, Thomas, ran a successful investment firm, spending more time with spreadsheets than with his family. Together, they created a life of material comfort and emotional poverty. Then there was Jacob, my younger brother by 3 years, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I struggled to receive a nod of acknowledgement for straight, as Jacob would be lavishly praised for B's, it wasn't his fault, and we actually maintained a decent relationship despite the obvious favoritism. He simply fit the mold our parents had created, while I was always the square peg being forced into a round hole. From my earliest memories, I gravitated toward art. Colors and shapes spoke to me in ways numbers and legal briefs never could. At 7, my watercolor painting won a statewide competition. My teacher called it exceptional and arranged for it to be displayed at the town hall. My mother's response when I excitedly told her, "That's nice, Kay, but maybe focus more on your math. Nobody makes a living painting pictures." That became the soundtrack of my childhood. Every artistic achievement met with dismissal. Every creative pursuit treated as a distraction from what really mattered in the Lancaster family: academic excellence, professional success, and social status. Art therapy. Is that even a real profession? My mother had asked when I declared my college major. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, anything with your grades, and you choose to waste it on this? My father, sitting behind his newspaper as he did most evenings, simply sighed. His silence was its own form of disapproval. He never actively criticized me like my mother did, but he never defended me either. His emotional absence was a constant in our home, leaving me alone to weather my mother's disappointments. I became the perfect daughter in every other way, hoping that would be enough. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect manners. I joined the debate team to please my father, took advanced science courses to appease my mother. I molded myself into what I thought they wanted, shrinking my true self smaller and smaller until sometimes I couldn't remember who I really was. College at Tufts was my first taste of freedom. For 4 years, I lived just far enough away to breathe, but close enough to maintain the expected family appearances. I flourished in my art therapy program, discovering my talent for helping others process trauma through creative expression. For the first time, I found my voice. But after graduation, the gravitational pull of family expectations drew me back to Boston. "Family stays together," my mother insisted. "Besides, all the best opportunities are here." What she meant was all the best opportunities for her to monitor and guide my life were here. So I returned, finding work at a community center as an art therapist. It wasn't prestigious enough for my parents' cocktail party conversations, but it fulfilled me in ways they could never understand. I helped children process grief, and trauma veterans cope with PTSD, and elderly patients find joy through creative expression. My clients valued what my family dismissed. Then I met David, a kind-eyed architect who saw me completely and loved what he saw. He was the first person who encouraged me to set boundaries with my family, who didn't think I was overreacting when I came home deflated after family gatherings. "You deserve better, Kay," he would say, holding me as I cried after particularly brutal Sunday dinners. "You don't have to keep showing up for people who make you feel invisible." But breaking generational patterns isn't easy. Every month, like clockwork, I would return to my parents' house, hope somehow renewed that this time would be different. This time my mother might see me. This time my father might defend me. This time I might feel like I belonged in my own family. After 2 years together, David proposed on a rainy afternoon in our apartment. Nothing flashy or public, just an honest question asked with complete love. When I called my parents with the news, my mother's first response was, "Well, I suppose it's about time. You're not getting any younger. Not congratulations. Not happiness for her daughter finding love." Just another subtle reminder that I was somehow behind schedule on her predetermined timeline for my life. David suggested we elope. I considered it, but some part of me still longed for my family's approval, still hoped they might celebrate something important to me just once. The morning of that fateful family dinner, I sat in my therapist, Dr. Grace Parker's office, fidgeting with the fringe of a throw pillow. "You don't have to go, Kay," she said gently. "Missing one family dinner won't end the world." "You don't understand." I replied the same thing I always said. In my family, showing up is non-negotiable. My mother would never let me hear the end of it. "And yet you're an adult woman with her own life and choices," Dr. Parker countered. "What would happen if you simply said no?" I couldn't even imagine it. The phone calls, the guilt trips, the subtle references for months to come. In the Lancaster family, attendance wasn't just expected, it was required. Absence was betrayal. That evening, as I stood before my closet trying to decide what to wear, David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Wear whatever makes you feel strong," he whispered, kissing my temple. I chose a deep blue dress that brought out my eyes, subtle jewelry, and comfortable shoes, in case I needed to make a quick escape. My anxiety rituals began as I got ready, deep breathing, positive affirmations, reminding myself I could leave if things got too difficult. "Remember what we practiced," David said as I grabbed my purse. "You don't have to accept criticism disguised as concern. You can change the subject. You can even leave." I nodded, though. We both knew I'd never actually walked out of a family dinner before, no matter how hurtful things got. "I love you exactly as you are," he added as I headed out the door. "Come home when you need to, not when they tell you it's acceptable to leave." The drive to my parents' Beacon Hill home took 20 minutes each minute, increasing the tightness in my chest. Their house always impressed visitors with its historic charm and tasteful decor, but to me it felt like the site of 1,000 small wounds, each room holding memories of criticisms and disappointments. I parked my modest Honda between my father's Mercedes and my mother's Audi, already feeling inadequate before even stepping inside. Taking one last deep breath, I plastered on what David called my family dinner smile and rang the doorbell. My mother answered, immaculately dressed as always, not a strand of her silver-highlighted hair out of place, despite having prepared a 3-course meal. "Kay, you're here. Come in," she said, her tone neither warm nor cold, just acknowledging my existence. No hug, no kiss on the cheek, just a quick once-over of my appearance. "I see you're still wearing your hair that way." And so it began. The first hour was deceptively pleasant. My father poured wine, asked polite questions about my work without actually listening to the answers. My mother served her famous crab cakes, discussing her recent legal victory defending a pharmaceutical company. I nodded and smiled, playing my part in the performance of family harmony. "The Morgan's daughter just made partner at Goldman Sachs," my mother mentioned casually while passing the salad. "Wasn't she in your year at Tufts?" "Emily was 2 years ahead of me," I replied, recognizing the familiar comparison game. "We weren't in the same program." "Still impressive achievement for someone so young," my mother continued. "Her parents are thrilled, of course." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Why couldn't you make us thrilled that way? I took another sip of wine, remembering Dr. Parker's advice to let such comments pass without internalizing them. Just as my mother began serving the main course, the doorbell rang, announcing Jacob and Sophie's arrival. They entered in a flurry of apologies and hugs, bringing a different energy into the room. "Sorry we're late," Jacob said, helping Sophie with her coat. "The traffic was terrible." My mother, who would have chided me for such tardiness, simply beamed. "Not to worry. We've barely started. Come sit down." The contrast in welcome wasn't lost on me, but I pushed the observation aside, genuinely happy to see my brother and Sophie, who had always been kind to me. Sophie embraced me warmly. "That blue is gorgeous on you. And let me see that ring again." As I extended my hand to show her my engagement ring, my mother quickly redirected. "Jacob, tell us about the new project your firm is handling. I heard it mentioned on the news." The conversation shifted instantly away from my engagement, but Sophie gave my hand a squeeze of solidarity before taking her seat. Over roast beef and vegetables, Jacob cleared his throat. Actually, we have some news, he said, looking at Sophie with undisguised adoration. We weren't going to say anything yet, but Sophie's pregnant. You're going to be grandparents. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My mother actually gasped, her hand flying to her chest. My father stood up to shake Jacob's hand and kiss Sophie's cheek. There were tears, exclamations, immediate discussions of nursery colors and family names. This is the most wonderful news. My mother declared, her voice thick with emotion I'd rarely heard. The first Lancaster grandchild. I was truly happy for them. Jacob would make an incredible father and Sophie a loving mother, but I couldn't help noticing the stark difference between this reaction and the muted acknowledgement of my engagement. My mother had shown more emotion in the past 5 minutes than she had at any event in my life. As the excitement continued, I caught Sophie watching me with understanding in her eyes. She'd witnessed enough family dynamics to know what I might be feeling. When my mother rushed off to get a special bottle of champagne she'd been saving, Sophie whispered, "You'll be the best aunt ever. This baby is going to need your creativity and kindness." I squeezed her hand gratefully, pushing down the complicated emotions rising within me. This was their moment. My feelings could wait. But as dessert approached, I had no idea that the evening was about to take a turn I'd never forget. The dining room smelled of warm cinnamon and vanilla as my mother proudly carried in her famous apple pie, the one recipe she'd inherited from her own mother and perfected over decades. It was one of the few genuinely warm traditions in our family, this pie, that appeared at every significant gathering. "I made this with those special apples from the farmer's market," my mother announced, setting it in the center of the table with unusual care. Even my mother's baking came with a subtle reminder of her superiority, her attention to details others might overlook. As she served slices onto the delicate china dessert plates, the conversation naturally turned to Jacob and Sophie's news and the family's future. "We'll have to convert the guest room into a proper nursery," my mother said, already planning for frequent visits from her grandchild. "I'm thinking a nautical theme, classic and educational." Sophie smiled politely. "We're still exploring ideas." Kay actually suggested a beautiful mural with a storybook forest theme. She even offered to paint it herself. I hadn't expected Sophie to mention this, our private conversation from last week. A flash of surprise crossed my mother's face before she composed herself. "That's a lovely thought, but professional decorators would be more appropriate. We want everything perfect for the first Lancaster grandchild." My contribution dismissed, as always. As we began eating the pie, my father surprisingly turned attention my way. "And what about you and David? Any wedding plans yet?" All eyes shifted to me, and I felt a momentary hope that my life events might merit genuine interest. "Actually, yes. We're thinking a small ceremony in the botanical gardens next spring, just close friends and family. David's sister is a florist, so she'll handle the arrangements." My mother's fork paused midway to her mouth. The botanical gardens. But what about the Lancaster tradition of church weddings? "Your cousin Abigail had 500 guests at Trinity Church. It was in Boston Magazine." "That's not really our style," I explained, trying to keep my voice light. "We want something intimate, meaningful." "Meaningful can still be appropriate," my mother countered. "People expect certain standards from this family. You can't just have some bohemian gathering and call it a wedding." Jacob attempted to lighten the mood. "Come on, Mom. Times are changing. Besides, Kay's always done things her own way." "That's one way to put it," my mother replied with a tight smile. "Always the unconventional one." The word hung in the air between us. Unconventional. In my mother's vocabulary, it ranked somewhere between disappointing and embarrassing. Speaking of unconventional, Jacob continued, unaware of how his words stung Sophie and I were just talking about how Kay's always marched to her own drummer. "Remember that time she showed up to grandmother's birthday in that paint-splattered outfit?" They all chuckled at the memory, though it wasn't actually paint, but a deliberately designed dress I'd saved for months to purchase. The distinction wouldn't matter to them. Trying to steer the conversation towards safer ground, I mentioned David, and I have also been talking about starting a family after the wedding. We're both ready for that next step. A strange expression crossed my mother's face, then something between amusement and disbelief. She took a sip of her wine, set the glass down carefully, and looked directly at me. "I wish you were never born." The words landed like a physical blow. Everyone at the table laughed, including my father. Everyone except me. It wasn't a slip of the tongue or a misunderstanding. She had said exactly those words with the precise intonation to suggest she was joking while ensuring the barb found its mark. I felt the blood drain from my face as conversations from my therapy sessions flashed through my mind. Dr. Parker had asked me once, "What's the worst thing your mother could say to you?" This had been my answer, and now she had actually said it. My hand trembled slightly as I set my fork down beside my half-eaten pie. The room seemed to blur around the edges, sounds becoming distant as my heartbeat thundered in my ears. 34 years of similar comments, thinly veiled as jokes or helpful criticism, compressed into this single, undeniable moment of truth. My mother continued speaking something about how having children required more responsibility than I might be prepared for, but her words faded beneath the roaring in my head. I thought about all the times I'd stayed silent, all the digs I'd laughed off to keep the peace, all the wounds I'd hidden to maintain the family's perfect image. The cost of that silence suddenly seemed unbearably high. David's voice echoed in my memory. "You deserve to be treated with respect, Kay, especially by your family." In that moment, looking at my mother's face animated with amusement at her own cruelty, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of seeking approval transformed into a sudden clarifying need for self-respect. I put my fork down slowly, deliberately. My heart was racing, but I managed to maintain a calm exterior. I even smiled, though it felt foreign on my face. The laughter around the table began to fade as they noticed my expression. My mother's smile faltered slightly, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere. And then, after 34 years of swallowing my responses, I decided to finally speak my truth. I've spent my entire life trying to earn the love you freely give to everyone else. My voice was quiet but steady, cutting through the lingering echoes of their laughter. The room went completely silent. 5 simple faces stared back at me with expressions ranging from shock to confusion. My mother's smile froze, then slowly disappeared. My father stopped mid-chew. Jacob and Sophie exchanged glances across the table. The grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly seemed deafening. Kay, my mother, started a warning in her tone. "It was just a joke." "No," I said, surprising myself with my calmness. "It wasn't just a joke. It never has been." I looked around at the beautiful dining room with its expensive wallpaper and family portraits, all carefully arranged to present the image of perfection. "Do you know what it's like to grow up hearing that nothing you do is ever quite right?" I continued, my voice gaining strength. "To have every achievement dismissed, every dream belittled, to be told in 1,000 different ways that who you are is fundamentally disappointing." My mother's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. We gave you every advantage, every opportunity." "Yes, every opportunity to become who you wanted me to be," I agreed. "But never the freedom to be myself." I turned to look directly at her. "When I won the statewide art competition in 3rd grade, you didn't even come to the ceremony. When I graduated with honors in my program, you spent the entire celebration talking about Jacob's internship. When I got my first professional position, you called it cute and changed the subject." My voice trembled slightly, but I pushed forward. "And just now, when everyone is celebrating Jacob and Sophie's wonderful news, which I am genuinely happy about, you found it appropriate to say you wish I had never been born." "You're being oversensitive," my mother replied, her attorney persona taking over. It was clearly a joke about the challenges of parenthood. "Then why didn't you say it to Jacob? He's becoming a parent too." The question hung in the air, unanswerable. My father finally spoke, his voice uncomfortable. "Kay, your mother didn't mean anything by it. You know how she is." "Yes, I do know how she is," I said, turning to him. "And so do you. You've watched her undermine me my entire life and never once stepped in. Your silence was its own kind of cruelty." His face flushed red, whether from anger or shame I couldn't tell. "Now, wait just a minute," he began, but I wasn't finished. "When I was 12 and got the highest math scores in my class, she said it was because the other students weren't trying hard enough. When I was 16 and had my artwork displayed at the youth gallery, she said it was nice that they gave everyone a chance to participate. When I told you both I was engaged to a man I love who loves and respects me, your response was to ask if we had considered a prenup." Sophie reached across the table and touched my arm gently. "Kay, we had no idea." It's not your fault, I told her sincerely. None of this is about you or Jacob. I'm truly happy for you both. My mother pushed her chair back slightly, her posture defensive. I will not sit here and be accused of being a bad mother. Everything I've ever done was for this family, for your benefit. I'm not calling you a bad mother, I clarified, my voice softening slightly. I'm telling you how your words and actions have affected me. There's a difference. Well, I think you're being dramatic, she countered. If you've felt this way all these years, why haven't you said something before? It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself countless times in therapy. Because I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid of exactly this reaction. Afraid of being dismissed and gaslit. Afraid of losing the family I've been desperately trying to please my entire life. My voice cracked slightly on the last words, and I took a deep breath to steady myself. And what's changed now? My father asked, his tone somewhere between curious and challenging. I said simply. I've changed. I've realized that continuing to accept this treatment isn't just hurting me, it's enabling a dynamic that will eventually extend to others. I glanced meaningfully towards Sophie. I don't want any child in this family to grow up feeling the way I have. Jacob, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Kay, I had no idea you felt this way. I'm sorry if I've contributed to it. You haven't, I assured him. This isn't about you. No, it's about me, apparently, my mother interjected, her voice sharp. About how I failed as a mother because I didn't sufficiently praise your hobby or attend every little event. The dismissal in her words was so familiar, so expected, that I almost laughed. This, I said quietly, this right here is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't even hear me without diminishing my experience. My art isn't a hobby, mother. It's my profession, my passion, and through it I help people heal from traumas much like the one we're discussing right now. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I think I should go, I said. I've said what I needed to say. So that's it, my mother asked, her voice rising. You make these wild accusations and then just leave. That's very mature, Kay. I picked up my purse from the sideboard, feeling strangely calm despite the storm raging around and within me. I'm not leaving because I'm running away, I explained. I'm leaving because I've said my piece and I don't see this conversation becoming productive. I'm setting a boundary. A boundary. My mother nearly spat the word. Is that what your therapist calls it when you disrespect your parents at their own dinner table? I paused at the doorway and turned back to look at them all one last time. My mother's face flushed with indignation, my father looking uncomfortable and out of his depth, Jacob and Sophie watching with concerned expressions. I love you, I said, surprised to find. I meant it despite everything. All of you. But I won't participate in my own diminishment anymore. When you're ready to have a real conversation to actually hear me, I'll be there. But until then, I need some distance. And with those words, I walked out of the dining room, through the front door, and into the cool evening air. For the first time in my life, I left a family dinner on my own terms before being dismissed. As I got into my car, hands shaking as the adrenaline began to subside, I realized that regardless of what happened next, something fundamental had changed. I had finally spoken my truth, and in doing so had set myself free. The drive home passed in a blur. Streetlights smeared through my tears as I navigated familiar routes on autopilot. By the time I pulled into our apartment building's parking lot, my makeup was streaked down my cheeks, and my carefully styled hair had come undone from running my hands through it repeatedly. I sat in the silent car for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Had I really done that? Had I actually stood up to my mother after all these years? Part of me felt powerful, liberated. Another part was terrified of the consequences, already calculating the damage to relationships, the difficult conversations to come. My phone had buzzed several times during the drive, but I hadn't checked it. Now I glanced down to see multiple text notifications. 2 from Jacob, 1 from Sophie, none from my parents. Not surprising. I didn't read any of them. Instead, I called the one person I needed most. David, I said when he answered, my voice breaking. Can you come home? I need you. 15 minutes later, I was curled against him on our couch, his arms creating a safe harbor as I recounted every detail of the dinner. He listened without interrupting occasionally. brushing away my tears or pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "I'm so proud of you," he said when I finished. "That took incredible courage." "Or incredible stupidity," I replied, half joking. "I basically just blew up my entire family." David shook his head firmly. "You didn't blow up anything. You just stopped pretending the damage wasn't already there. That's not the same thing." I nestled deeper into his embrace, grateful for his unwavering support. "What happens now?" "Now," he said thoughtfully, "you give yourself permission to feel whatever comes up. Guilt, relief, fear, pride, all of it. And you remember that you did nothing wrong by speaking your truth." That night, sleep came in fitful bursts. I kept replaying the scene at dinner, sometimes imagining I'd said more, sometimes wishing I'd said less. By morning, doubt had begun creeping in. Had I overreacted? Was I being too sensitive, just as my mother claimed? When I finally checked my phone, Jacob's texts were surprisingly supportive. "I had no idea things were so bad for you. I'm here if you need to talk. For what it's worth, I think you were incredibly brave last night." Sophie's message was equally kind. "I've noticed some of what you mentioned, but didn't know how deep it went. I'm here for you, whatever you need." My father had sent a single text at 7 a.m. "Your mother is very upset. I think we all need to calm down and discuss this rationally once emotions have settled." Typical of him to focus on managing the situation rather than addressing the underlying issues, and telling too that he mentioned my mother's feelings but not mine. From my mother there was only silence. No calls, no texts, no emails. The silence felt both punitive and familiar, a tactic she'd employed throughout my childhood whenever I'd disappointed her. She would withdraw all warmth and communication until I apologized and fell back in line. The difference was this time I had no intention of apologizing. The next few days were surreal. I went through the motions of normal life, seeing clients at the community center, discussing wedding plans with David, but everything felt slightly off-kilter. I disrupted a family pattern that had been in place for decades, and the aftershocks kept hitting me at unexpected moments. Wednesday evening, my phone rang with Jacob's number. I hesitated before answering, unsure if he was calling as an ally or an emissary from our parents. His voice was tentative, unusual for my confident brother. "Hey," I replied, equally cautious. "I just wanted to check on you. Are you okay?" The genuine concern in his voice brought fresh tears to my eyes. "I'm hanging in there. How are things at the house?" He sighed heavily. Tense. Mom's alternating between acting like nothing happened and making pointed comments about ungrateful children. "And Dad?" "You know Dad. He's hiding in his study, coming out only when absolutely necessary." A pause stretched between us, filled with unspoken family history. Jacob finally continued. "I need to say something. I should have spoken up for you more over the years. I saw how differently they treated us, but it was easier to accept the favoritism than to challenge it." His honesty surprised me. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix their behavior." "Maybe not, but I could have been a better brother. I'm sorry." His apology, so unexpected and genuine, loosened something tight in my chest. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." "Sophie wants to have lunch with you," he added. "Just the two of you. She says she has some things she'd like to talk about." This piqued my curiosity. Sure, I'd like that. After we hung up, I sat quietly processing. Jacob's call had been an olive branch. I hadn't expected a small confirmation that my words had landed somewhere real. The lunch with Sophie 2 days later proved even more revealing. We met at a quiet cafe near my office, and after some careful small talk, she leaned forward confidentially. "I need to tell you something," she said, stirring her tea. "Your mother has been treating me the same way." I blinked in surprise. Sophie had always seemed immune to my mother's criticisms, smoothly navigating family dynamics I found treacherous. "Since we got married," she continued, "there have been comments about my career choices, my homemaking skills, even how I dress. At first I thought I was imagining it, but after hearing you speak up at dinner, I realized it's been happening all along." "I had no idea," I said truthfully. She smiled sadly. "I hid it well. I didn't want to cause problems between Jacob and his family. But now, with the baby coming," she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach, "I don't want my child growing up in that environment either." We spent the next hour sharing stories, comparing experiences, and laughing with the dark humor of shared survivors. For the first time, I felt truly seen and validated by someone who understood exactly what I'd been through. Meanwhile, my phone remained conspicuously silent from my parents' end. A week passed then, too. My father's text message arrived on a Sunday morning. "Your mother and I expect you at dinner next weekend. We need to resolve this situation as a family." Not an invitation, an expectation, no acknowledgement of my feelings or boundaries, just the same old pattern reasserting itself. After consulting with Dr. Parker, I replied simply, "I won't be attending. I'm still taking the space I need. I'm open to a conversation when you're ready to truly listen." This deviation from the script sent ripples through the family system. My father called immediately, something he rarely did. "Be reasonable," he began without preamble. "Your mother has planned this dinner specifically to smooth things over." "I don't want things smoothed over, Dad," I replied evenly. "I want them addressed honestly. There's a difference." His sigh was heavy with exasperation. "She's your mother. She deserves your respect." "Respect goes both ways," I countered, "and love isn't the same as obedience." After more circular conversation that resolved nothing, we hung up with the issue unresolved. For the first time in my adult life, I would miss a mandatory family dinner. That evening, alone in our apartment, while David was working late, panic hit me in waves. What was I doing? Who did I think I was to disrupt decades of family patterns? The urge to call my mother and apologize, to slip back into my familiar role of peacekeeper, was nearly overwhelming. Instead, I called my therapist's emergency line. "What you're feeling is normal," Dr. Parker assured me. "Systems resist change. When you alter your role in the family dynamic, everyone feels the disruption, and there's enormous pressure to return to the familiar patterns even when they're harmful." "So what do?" I asked, my voice small. "You hold your boundary," she said simply. "Not with anger or punishment, but with calm conviction. And you surround yourself with people who support your growth." Taking her advice to heart, I leaned heavily on David's unwavering support in the weeks that followed. I also reconnected with friends I'd neglected due to family obligations, finding strength in relationships that valued me as I was. The missed family dinner came and went. According to Jacob, who called the next day, my empty chair had been like a black hole at the table, sucking all conversation toward it without ever being directly acknowledged. My mother had maintained a rigid smile throughout the meal, while my father attempted strained conversation about neutral topics. "It was the most uncomfortable dinner I've ever sat through," Jacob admitted. And that's saying something in this family. As strange as it sounds, his report gave me a sense of validation. My absence had been felt. My voice, even in silence, had made an impact. 2 months passed without direct contact from my mother. During that time, I discovered something unexpected. Space from the constant criticism allowed me to breathe in ways I never had before. Without the weekly reminder of my inadequacies, I found myself standing taller, speaking more confidently, making decisions without second-guessing every choice. David noticed it first. "You laugh more easily now," he observed one evening as we cooked dinner together, "and you've stopped apologizing for everything." He was right. The constant background hum of anxiety had diminished. I still thought about my family daily, still processed my feelings in therapy, but the acute pain had begun transforming into something else, something closer to understanding. At Dr. Parker's suggestion, I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents. Sitting in a circle with others who shared similar experiences was both heartbreaking and healing. Their stories echoed mine in ways that made me feel less alone, less broken. "The hardest part," said one woman whose mother sounded eerily similar to mine, "is accepting that they may never change, that the relationship you've always wanted might not be possible." Her words struck a chord so deep it resonated through my entire being. All my life, I'd been waiting for my mother to transform into someone capable of seeing and loving me as I was. What if that person didn't exist? What if she couldn't be who I needed her to be? With this difficult question echoing in my mind, I returned to my art. For years, I'd helped others express their emotions through creative expression while neglecting my own practice. Now I set up a small studio in our spare bedroom and began painting again for the first time in years. The first pieces were raw, almost violent with emotion, red slashes across canvas, dark spirals, fractured self-portraits. But as weeks passed, the images evolved, becoming more nuanced, more complex in their emotional landscape. I created a series exploring family dynamics, each painting expressing something words couldn't quite capture. My professional life flourished alongside this personal renaissance. Without constantly doubting myself, I brought new energy and ideas to my therapy sessions. I developed an innovative program for adolescent girls struggling with self-image, combining art therapy with mindfulness techniques. When the community center director praised my work and offered me a promotion to department head, I accepted without the usual spiral of self-doubt. David, seeing my reluctance to set a wedding date while family tensions remained high, suggested we postpone our formal plans. "The timing should feel right for both of us," he said. "There's no rush." His patience and understanding only confirmed what I already knew. I had chosen a partner who supported my growth rather than restricting it, who loved me for exactly who I was. Then came the unexpected call from my father 3 months after the dinner confrontation. "I'd like to meet with you," he said, his voice sounding older, more tired than I remembered. "Just the two of us. No agenda, no expectations." We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. When I arrived, I barely recognized him at first. My father, always impeccably groomed and professionally dressed, looked rumpled and gray. The confident businessman had been replaced by someone more vulnerable, more human. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat across from him. No hug, no kiss on the cheek, but his eyes held a warmth I wasn't accustomed to seeing. We exchanged awkward pleasantries about the weather, the coffee, mundane topics that felt safe. Then, surprising me entirely, he took a deep breath and said, "I owe you an apology, Kay." I nearly spilled my latte. In 34 years, I had never heard my father apologize for anything. "I've been doing some thinking," he continued, staring into his coffee. "Some reading, too, about family dynamics and emotional abuse. Terms I never thought would apply to our family." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I failed you as a father. I saw how your mother treated you differently from Jacob, and I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that all mothers and daughters have complicated relationships. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it." His voice cracked slightly, another first in my experience. "But the truth is, I was a coward. It was easier to look away than to confront your mother or examine my own behavior." I sat stunned, unable to formulate a response to this unprecedented vulnerability. "You want to know why?" he continued. "Because my mother treated me the same way. Nothing was ever good enough, every achievement dismissed, every effort criticized. I grew up thinking that's just how parents showed love, by pushing you to be better, by never being satisfied." This revelation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of my family. "Grandma Margaret?" I asked, thinking of the elegant, reserved woman I'd known only in her later years. He nodded. "She was difficult, especially with me. Your Uncle Robert was her favorite, just as Jacob was your mother's." I swore I'd never play favorites with my own children, but instead I just stepped back entirely and let it happen all over again. We talked for nearly 3 hours, delving into family history. I'd never known patterns that stretched back generations. For the first time, I saw my father not just as the emotionally distant authority figure of my childhood, but as someone who had been wounded himself, who had never learned the tools to break the cycle. I'm not telling you this to excuse anything he said as our meeting drew to a close. Just to explain, perhaps, and to let you know I'm trying to understand. "What about Mom?" I asked, the question that had been hovering between us. He sighed heavily. "Your mother is struggling. She sees your absence as rejection, your boundaries as punishment. She doesn't yet understand what I'm beginning to see. Which is that this isn't about her. It's about you claiming the respect you've always deserved." As we parted, he hugged me awkwardly, patting my back as if unsure how much physical affection was appropriate after so many years of distance. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. In the following weeks, I maintained my boundaries, while cautiously rebuilding a relationship with my father on new terms. We met occasionally for coffee, exchanged texts about neutral topics, small steps but significant ones. Jacob and Sophie remained steady allies. As Sophie's pregnancy progressed, we grew closer, bonding over shared experiences and future plans. When they asked me to help design the nursery, complete with the storybook forest mural, I'd originally suggested the gesture felt like a meaningful acknowledgement of my creative gifts. David and I began tentatively replanning our wedding, a spring ceremony in the botanical gardens, just as I'd always wanted. Small, intimate, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our love. When the invitation list came up, I faced the question I'd been avoiding. Would I invite my mother? "What feels right to you?" David asked, supporting whatever decision I made. After much reflection and consultation with Dr. Parker, I decided yes. I would extend the invitation, not from obligation, but from a place of emerging strength. I could include her without needing her approval. I could be in her presence without reverting to old patterns. At least I hoped I could. The invitation was sent. The response would be her choice. Through it all, I continued painting each canvas a step in my healing journey. When a local gallery owner saw my work at a community exhibition and offered me a small show, it felt like life coming full circle. The artistic expression that had been dismissed for so long would now be publicly celebrated. The night before the gallery opening, my phone rang with my mother's number. After 6 months of silence, seeing her name on my screen sent adrenaline coursing through my system. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Hello, Mom." Her voice, when it came, sounded smaller than I remembered. "I heard about your art show tomorrow. From Jacob." "Yes," I replied, unsure where this was heading. A pause stretched between us, filled with decades of unspoken words. "I'd like to come," she said finally, "if that would be all right with you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of our conflict. But it was something I'd never had before, a request, rather than a demand, an expression of interest in something that mattered to me. I'd like that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Whether this represented the beginning of real change, or simply another chapter in our complicated relationship, remained to be seen. But for the first time, I faced the possibility without fear. Whatever happened next, I had found my voice, and I wouldn't lose it again. 6 months after that fateful dinner, I sat across from my mother at a quiet table in a neutral cafe we'd both agreed upon. Neither her territory nor mine, just a peaceful place with good coffee and enough privacy for difficult conversations. She looked older somehow, the carefully maintained facade showing tiny cracks around the eyes and mouth. Her posture was still perfect, her clothing still immaculate, but something had shifted in her demeanor. There was a hesitancy I'd never associated with my confident, assertive mother. "Thank you for meeting me," she began formally, as if this were a business negotiation rather than a conversation between mother and daughter. "Thank you for asking, instead of demanding," I replied, keeping my voice gentle to soften the words. Her lips pressed together briefly, but she nodded. "I deserve that." We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence until our drinks arrived. I waited, letting her take the lead. This conversation had to come from her. I'd already said my piece months ago. "Your art show was impressive," she finally offered. "The series about family dynamics especially. Powerful work." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the specific observation. She had actually looked at my paintings, not just made an appearance. She stirred her coffee needlessly. "Your father tells me he's been talking to you, that you've been reconnecting." "We have. It's been good." Another long silence stretched between us. I could almost see her internal struggle, the battle between pride and the desire for reconciliation. "I'm not good at this," she finally admitted, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Admitting mistakes has never been my strong suit." "I know," I said simply. She looked up sharply, perhaps, expecting argument or accusation, but I just waited. "The things you said at dinner," she continued hesitantly, "about how I've made you feel your whole life. Is that really how it's been for you?" The question seemed genuine, not defensive as I might have expected. "Yes," I answered honestly, "for as long as I can remember." She absorbed this, her face a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. "I never intended," she began, then stopped herself. "No, that's not entirely true. Sometimes I did intend to push you, to challenge you. I told myself it was for your own good, to make you stronger in a world that doesn't reward sensitivity or creativity the way it rewards more conventional talents." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth. But I never intended to make you feel unloved or unwanted. That comment at dinner was inexcusable, even as a poor attempt at humor. I can see that now. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received from her. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? She asked unexpectedly. Not even your father knows this. I nodded, curious. My mother, your grandmother, said those exact words to me when I was 14. I wish you were never born. Not as a joke, she meant it. I sat back shocked. Grandma Elizabeth had always seemed so proper, so controlled. The perfectly coiffed matriarch who hosted flawless holiday gatherings and remembered everyone's birthdays. She was different behind closed doors, my mother continued, seeing my surprise. Cold, critical, sometimes cruel. Nothing I did was right. I wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, obedient enough. My brother could do no wrong, but I was always the disappointment. The parallels to my own experience were unmistakable. As if reading my thoughts, she added, I swore I'd never be like her. I thought by pushing you towards success rather than criticizing you for failure, I was being different, better. She looked down at her hands. I didn't realize I was repeating the pattern in my own way. It's called intergenerational trauma, I said, gently thinking of my support group discussions. We tend to parent as we were parented unless we consciously break the cycle. She nodded slowly. Your father mentioned something similar. He's been reading books about it. This new image of my father reading psychology books at his age almost made me smile despite the serious conversation. I can't change the past, my mother continued. I can't undo the hurt I caused, however unintentional some of it may have been. No, I agreed. None of us can change what's already happened, but we can choose what happens next. Her eyes, so similar to mine in shape and color, met mine directly. What do you want to happen next, Kay? It was the first time she'd ever really asked what I wanted without prescription or judgment. The significance of that simple question wasn't lost on me. I want a relationship with you, I said honestly, but a different one than we've had. One based on mutual respect where both our voices matter. Where criticism isn't disguised as concern, and where differences aren't treated as deficiencies. I'm not sure I know how to have that kind of relationship, she admitted, but I'd like to try. It wasn't a Hollywood transformation. My mother didn't suddenly become a different person, emotionally expressive and consistently supportive. But it was a beginning, a small opening in a door that had been firmly closed for decades. In the months that followed, we built a new relationship brick by fragile brick. There were setbacks, times when old patterns resurfaced, when thoughtless comments slipped out. But now, instead of swallowing my hurt, I named it. Instead of dismissing my feelings, she tried to hear them. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Our wedding day arrived on a perfect spring morning, the botanical gardens in full bloom. Just 40 guests gathered under a canopy of flowering trees as David and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves. My father walked me down the aisle, his eyes suspiciously bright. My mother sat in the front row wearing the blue dress I'd suggested rather than the formal gown she'd initially insisted would be more appropriate. When the officiant pronounced us married and David kissed me, I caught my mother's eye over his shoulder. She was smiling, really smiling, without reservation or calculation. For that moment, at least, she was simply happy for her daughter's happiness. The small reception that followed was everything I'd wanted, intimate, joyful, focused on connection rather than impression. When Jacob and Sophie arrived with baby Noah, now 3 months old, my mother surprised me by stepping back, allowing me my moment as the doting new aunt without competing for attention. Later, as David and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, she approached me quietly. You were right, she said, adjusting my necklace with uncharacteristic gentleness. This day should have been exactly what you wanted. It's perfect. Coming from my mother, this admission felt monumental. My healing journey continued long after the wedding day. Through ongoing therapy, my support group, and my art, I processed the complex emotions of my childhood. I painted a series about breaking generational patterns, which was featured in a prestigious regional exhibition. When a reporter asked about my inspiration, I spoke openly about family healing, drawing boundaries with love, and the courage to change inherited patterns. As Jacob and Sophie's son grew, I became the aunt I'd always wished for as a child, present supportive, celebrating his unique qualities rather than trying to shape him into a predetermined mold. I watched carefully for signs of the old family patterns emerging, in how they parented, ready to gently point them out if needed. But Jacob, perhaps having witnessed the consequences of favoritism firsthand, seemed determined to break the cycle. David and I began discussions about starting our own family, approaching the prospect with both excitement and thoughtful consideration. We get to create our own pattern, he reminded me, as we talked about parenting philosophies. We're not bound by either of our family's mistakes. Working with Dr. Parker, I developed tools for recognizing and interrupting the critical inner voice that still sometimes spoke in my mother's tone. I practiced self-compassion, celebrating my achievements without qualification, and acknowledging my struggles without shame. Slowly, I learned to parent my own inner child with the love and acceptance I'd always craved. A year after our confrontation, my relationship with my mother had found a new equilibrium. Not perfect, not always easy, but genuine, in a way it had never been before. We'd agreed to monthly lunches, just the two of us, where we practiced honest communication in small, manageable doses. Sometimes these conversations were difficult, sometimes surprisingly enjoyable. Always they were real in a way our interactions had never been. During one such lunch, she surprised me by asking about my art therapy work, showing genuine interest for the first time. "I think I understand now," she said thoughtfully, as I described helping a client process grief through visual expression. "You have a gift I never recognized because it was so different from anything I valued or understood." That simple acknowledgement, coming so late but so sincerely, healed something deep within me. As I reflect on the journey that began with that dinner and those devastating words, I'm struck by how a moment of terrible pain became the catalyst for profound growth and healing. Had my mother never said those words, had I never found the courage to respond, we might still be locked in our destructive pattern generation after generation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to put down your fork, look the person who hurt you in the eye, and calmly speak your truth. The silence that follows might be terrifying, but it's in that silence that healing can finally begin. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love to protect yourself? How did you find the courage to speak your truth? Let me know in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who they might need to hear it. Remember, breaking generational patterns isn't just healing for you. It creates possibility for everyone who comes after you. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to speak your own truth when you need it most.